My wife's plea for space was just a cruel deception, but I saw through her betrayal and delivered revenge that destroyed her world completely. "We're done," were the words she tossed at me, as if they were nothing, as if they didn't carry the weight of a wrecking ball aimed at our marriage. We were in the middle of another routine disagreement, nothing out of the ordinary, I thought. We'd bicker about the same old things, let it simmer down, and move on. But her tone that day was different, detached, distant. It wasn't the usual frustration or annoyance, it was a cold declaration. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I'd heard her correctly. "Space?" I repeated, half expecting her to backtrack, to soften it, maybe explain it away as just needing a break from the argument. But instead, she folded her arms, exhaled sharply, and avoided eye contact. "Yeah, space. Time to think. Time to figure things out." It felt surreal. This was my wife, my partner, my supposed teammate, telling me that she needed to step away. My instinct was to ask questions, to try and make sense of it. "What do you mean by space? Is this something temporary? Is there something I can do to fix things?" Her responses were clipped, vague, and maddeningly indifferent. "It's not about you," she said. "It's about me. I need this." I couldn't argue. What would be the point? It was clear her mind was made up. But the way she said it, the casual nature of her delivery, made it sting even more. It wasn't a plea for help nor a cry of frustration. It was a decision she had apparently been considering for some time, and this was how she chose to announce it. After that, I walked away, not out of anger, but because I didn't trust myself to keep speaking. My head felt like it was spinning. I didn't know how to process what had just happened. It wasn't the request for space itself that shook me, but the realization that this wasn't the first sign of trouble. It was just the clearest one. Later that night, as we both moved through the house in near silence, her words replayed over and over in my mind. I'd always known we had our issues, but I'd never thought she'd reach a point where she'd openly ask for distance from me. I kept wondering, what had I missed? What had I done or not done that made her feel like I was the one thing she needed to escape from looking back? I think I'd ignored a lot of the warning signs, the gradual disconnection, the way she stopped engaging in our conversations, her growing preoccupation with her own pursuits. It was like a puzzle I hadn't even realized I was trying to solve, and now the pieces were finally coming together. She didn't say it outright, but the subtext was clear. She wasn't happy, and she hadn't been for a long time. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, replaying every moment that could have led to this. I thought about the arguments, the compromises, and the sacrifices. I thought about the times I'd swallowed my own needs to prioritize hers, assuming it was what a good husband was supposed to do. And yet, here we were. The next morning, I tried again to open a dialogue. "Are you sure this is what you want?" I asked. I wanted to believe that maybe she'd reconsider, that maybe we could work through this together. But her response left no room for hope. "I just need time," she said, as if it were that simple. It wasn't simple for me. This wasn't how I envisioned my marriage going. I wasn't the kind of person who gave up easily, especially not on something or someone I'd invested years of my life in. But as I sat there, staring at her, I realized something I hadn't before. She wasn't just asking for space, she was telling me that she was done trying. Whether she said it outright or not, her actions spoke louder than her words ever could. That was the moment I stopped asking questions. If space was what she wanted, then space was what I'd give her, just not in the way she expected. After that conversation, the silence in the house wasn't just uncomfortable, it was suffocating. She avoided me, moving through our shared space like a ghost, and I let her what was there to say. Every time I thought about trying again, about reaching out, I stopped myself. What was the point? She'd made her position clear. Instead, I turned inward. My thoughts became my constant companion, and they weren't kind ones. I started replaying the years we'd spent together, trying to find the cracks I must have missed. And that's when it hit me. The cracks weren't hidden. They were right there, plain as day. I had just chosen to ignore them. I thought back to the early days of our marriage, how I'd thrown myself into being the best partner I could be. Whenever she had a dream, I put my own on hold to help her chase it. I shifted career plans because it made sense for her schedule. I spent hours listening to her vent about work, her friends, her family, always ready to offer support, always willing to be the steady foundation she needed. And when things got tough, when money was tight, when stress ran high, I was the one who shouldered the burden without complaint, or at least I thought I hadn't complained. But as I pieced together the history of our relationship, a bitter truth began to emerge. She had taken all of that for granted. Every compromise I made was met with an expectation for the next one. Every time I put her needs above mine, it wasn't reciprocated, it was absorbed, almost as if it were her due. I started asking myself questions I hadn't dared to before. Had she ever considered my dreams as much as I had considered hers? When was the last time she had sacrificed something meaningful for me? I couldn't think of a single instance. I thought about the times I had canceled plans with friends because she needed me at home, the vacations we didn't take because she decided the money should go towards something else, the hobbies I'd let fall to the wayside because they didn't fit into her vision of how we should spend our time. Each memory felt like another weight pressing down on me, another reminder of how much of myself I'd given away in the name of keeping the peace, of keeping us together. And what had I gotten in return? Indifference, distance, a partner who now needed space because apparently even being with me was too much for her. It was like waking up from a dream and realizing the reality around you wasn't what you thought it was. I had believed in us. I had believed that we were a team, that our struggles were just temporary hurdles on the road to something better. But now it was painfully obvious I was the only one fighting for this marriage. The realization made me angry, not just at her but at myself. How had I let this happen? How had I allowed myself to become so small in my own life? I used to be ambitious, driven. I used to have goals that didn't revolve around someone else's happiness. And yet, over the years, I had slowly erased parts of myself, convinced that doing so was the price of love. I started to see our relationship for what it truly was, one-sided. While I had been bending over backward to make her life easier, she had been drifting further away, prioritizing herself at every turn. The bitterness I felt wasn't just about her actions, it was about my own complicity. I had enabled this dynamic. I had let her needs eclipse my own, time and time again, because I thought that's what love required. Sitting there, alone with my thoughts, I knew I couldn't keep living this way. If she needed space, maybe it was because she had taken too much of mine. It was time to reclaim what I had lost, even if that meant letting go of her in the process. I wasn't sure how to do it yet, but one thing was clear. The sacrifices I'd made for her weren't going to define me anymore. After days of reflection, the anger and bitterness started to settle into something sharper, clarity. I realized I couldn't change her mind. That wasn't my role anymore, if it ever had been. What was left for me to do? Keep chasing after someone who didn't want to be caught? Keep pouring everything I had into a relationship that had become nothing but an empty shell? No, that wasn't going to be my story. The first step was a decision, not loud or dramatic, but resolute. I was done trying to fix things for her. If she needed space, she'd get it, but it would come on my terms, not hers. For years, I'd been the one to bridge the gaps, to smooth over the cracks, to make sure everything kept moving forward. That wasn't my job anymore. She'd asked for time to think? Fine. I'd use this time to reclaim my life. It started with small but deliberate choices. I stopped chasing after conversations, no longer the one to fill the silence between us. The quiet was heavy at first, awkward and suffocating, but I refused to break it. If she wasn't going to talk, neither was I. For the first time in a long time, I let her feel the distance she'd been creating for years. From there, I began to dismantle the framework of our shared life, piece by piece. The bank accounts were the first to go. I removed my name from anything joint and ensured my financial independence. I wasn't cruel about it, but I was firm. I'd spent enough of my money supporting her whims and wants while ignoring my own. That era was over. Next, I started reclaiming the house. It had always felt like our space, but as I looked around, I realized how little of it actually reflected me. Almost everything, every piece of decor, every arrangement, was something she had chosen. I cleared out the things that no longer felt like they belonged. Her stacks of books and personal touches began disappearing into boxes. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because I needed to make the space my own again. Emotionally, the hardest shift was letting go of the instinct to care. For years, I had made her needs my priority. If she seemed upset, I'd ask what was wrong. If she was overwhelmed, I'd step in to help. But now, when she came home looking exhausted or stressed, I stayed silent. When she sighed dramatically, waiting for me to ask what was bothering her, I didn't bite. It wasn't about being unkind. It was about unlearning the role I'd played for too long. The first time she noticed, she confronted me. "Why are you acting like this?" she demanded, her tone sharp with irritation. I met her gaze and said, "I'm respecting what you asked for. You said you needed space and I'm giving it to you." She blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of my answer. For once, I wasn't arguing or pleading. I wasn't trying to solve anything. I was just done. Her reaction was telling. She seemed confused, maybe even angry, as if she hadn't expected me to actually take her request seriously. But I didn't owe her an explanation beyond what I'd already said. If she wanted space, I was more than willing to let her have it, all of it. Each day, I felt a little stronger. Each decision I made felt like a piece of myself coming back. The sacrifices I'd made in the past no longer felt like badges of honor. They felt like weights I was finally learning to set down. This wasn't about punishing her or even about saving myself. It was about something simpler, reclaiming the respect I had lost somewhere along the way. By the time she noticed how much I had changed, it was too late. I wasn't the same person she had taken for granted all those years. I wasn't waiting for her approval, her gratitude, or her attention. I was focused on one thing and one thing only, moving forward without her holding me back. It didn't take long for her to notice that things were shifting. At first, she seemed indifferent, as if the changes I was making didn't matter. She still moved around the house with the same detached attitude, still avoided meaningful conversations. But when she tried to withdraw money from the joint account one evening and found her access revoked, everything changed. She stormed into the living room, holding her phone like it was evidence in a trial. "Why can't I access the account?" she demanded, her voice sharp, almost incredulous. I didn't look up from what I was doing. "I separated our finances," I said simply. "You wanted space, so I figured it made sense to make things clearer." Her face shifted from confusion to anger. "You can't just cut me off like that. We're married. This is our money." I set my book down and met her glare head on. "It hasn't felt like our anything for a long time," I said. "You've made it clear you want space. I'm just giving you what you asked for." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might argue further, but instead she spun on her heel and left the room. It wasn't the last confrontation, though. It was just the beginning. Over the next few days, she grew increasingly confrontational. She accused me of being cold, of punishing her for asking for what she needed. "You're acting like I'm the enemy," she said one night, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I shook my head. "I'm not punishing you. I'm respecting your wishes. You wanted distance, so I'm stepping back, that's all." Her frustration mounted. She wasn't used to this version of me, the one who didn't bend to her emotions, who didn't rush to smooth things over. For years, I had been the one to de-escalate conflicts, to bridge the gap when things got tense. Now, I let the tension sit. If she was uncomfortable, that was her problem to solve. The arguments came in waves, each one more intense than the last. "You can't just erase me like this," she shouted during one particularly heated exchange. "This is still my home, too." I stayed calm, though my patience was wearing thin. "No one's erasing you," I said. "But if you don't want to be part of this marriage, then I'm not going to keep living like I'm the only one holding it together." That seemed to sting. For a moment, she looked like she might say something, but then she turned away, retreating to the bedroom and slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the house, a fitting punctuation mark to yet another unresolved fight. It was strange watching her react to the very thing she'd asked for. She claimed she wanted space, yet when I started creating boundaries, financial, emotional, and otherwise, she seemed outraged. It was as if she hadn't considered what space really meant, or what it would look like when I stopped being the man who always gave her what she wanted. As the days turned into weeks, her anger began to wane. The shouting matches became fewer, replaced by quieter moments of discomfort. She started watching me more closely, as if trying to figure out what had changed. I could see her struggling to process the new dynamic, to adjust to a version of me she didn't recognize. One night, she tried a different approach. "I never wanted it to come to this," she said softly, sitting across from me at the dining table. Her tone was almost conciliatory, but there was still an edge of defensiveness. "I just needed some time to figure things out. I didn't think you'd shut me out completely." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to fix things. "I'm not shutting you out," I said evenly. "I'm just done giving more than I get. You asked for space. I'm giving you all the space you need." Her expression faltered, and for a moment I thought she might apologize or try to explain herself. But instead, she just nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked tired, almost defeated, but I didn't offer her comfort. That wasn't my role anymore. The quiet that followed our last conversation wasn't an ending, it was a transition. I could feel it in the air. There was no more shouting, no more accusations hurled in frustration. She wasn't trying to argue or guilt me anymore, but that didn't mean she'd accepted things. Instead, it felt like she was waiting, watching, hoping I'd snap back to the man I used to be, the one who would bend, the one who would do whatever it took to fix things. But that man was gone, and I wasn't about to bring him back. I started taking the next steps to separate our lives, both practically and emotionally. It was methodical, almost mechanical, but there was a strange sense of relief in it. Every small action felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd lost somewhere along the way. The house, once a shared space, became my focus. I started with the physical clutter, the things that screamed of her presence, her decorations, the framed pictures she insisted on hanging in every room, even the throw pillows she had bought to brighten up the space. One by one, they went into boxes. I didn't ask her permission. I didn't need to. If she wanted them, she could take them when she left. The process wasn't without resistance. One afternoon, she walked in while I was packing away a set of decorative trinkets she'd brought home years ago. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp with accusation. "Clearing out the things I don't need anymore," I replied without looking up. Her face hardened. "This is still my home too. You can't just throw everything away." I paused, meeting her gaze. "I'm not throwing anything away. If it's important to you, take it. But I'm done living in a space that doesn't feel like mine." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned and left, slamming the door behind her. But this time, I didn't flinch. The anger in her reaction wasn't my problem anymore. With each box I packed, I felt lighter. It wasn't just about removing physical objects, it was about removing the weight they carried. Every item had been part of a life I had worked so hard to build, but it was a life that didn't truly reflect who I was. Stripping it down to its bare bones felt like starting over. Not just in the house, but in my own identity. Emotionally, the changes were harder. I had spent so many years wrapped up in her moods, her needs, her problems. Detangling myself from that wasn't easy. At first, I'd catch myself wanting to ask how her day was or offer to help when she looked overwhelmed. But I stopped myself every time. She had made it clear she didn't want my involvement, and I wasn't about to offer it anymore. There were moments when I wondered if I was being too harsh, if maybe I should soften, give her one more chance. But then I'd remember all the times I had put her first and been met with indifference. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about self-respect. I wasn't trying to hurt her, I was trying to heal myself. The more distance I put between us, the more I realized how much I had lost in our marriage. Not just time or effort, but pieces of who I was. I started revisiting old hobbies I had abandoned, dusting off my guitar, picking up books I'd been meaning to read for years. I reached out to friends I hadn't seen in far too long. It was strange at first to focus on myself. It felt almost selfish, but also necessary. For the first time in years, I wasn't living for someone else. She noticed the changes, of course. Her expressions grew tighter, her demeanor more reserved. She tried in small ways to reestablish the dynamic we once had. Casual comments, shared jokes, small gestures meant to test the waters. But I didn't engage, not out of spite, but because I couldn't go back to that version of myself. I wouldn't. When the last box was packed and the house finally felt like mine again, a strange sense of peace settled over me. It wasn't the kind of triumphant peace you see in movies, with victorious music playing in the background. It was quieter, humbler, like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. She didn't leave immediately. For a while, she lingered in the background as though testing whether the changes I'd made were permanent. I could feel her watching me, her presence more of a shadow than a partnership. She was waiting, perhaps hoping for a crack to show in my resolve, but there was none. I wasn't playing games. I wasn't holding out for her to wake up one day and choose me again. I'd stopped waiting for her the moment I started choosing myself. Eventually, she tried to reconnect in earnest one evening. As I was sorting through the last remnants of shared belongings, she approached me, hesitant but determined. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than it had been in months. I glanced up but didn't stop what I was doing. "About what?" She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "About us. About everything that's happened. I know I haven't been fair to you. I know I've made mistakes. But I think we can fix this. I'm willing to try if you are." For a moment, I let her words hang in the air. They sounded genuine, maybe even sincere, but they felt hollow. Not because she didn't mean them, but because they were too late. I set the items in my hands aside and turned to face her. "I appreciate you saying that," I said, keeping my tone calm and measured. "But this isn't about fixing anything anymore. I spent years trying to fix things that weren't mine to fix, and I lost too much of myself in the process. I can't go back to that." Her expression faltered. "But I'm willing to change," she insisted, her voice trembling. "I can do better. We can be better." I shook my head. "You had the chance to change. I gave you every opportunity, more chances than I should have, and you made your choice. Now I'm making mine." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't flinch. I'd cried enough for both of us over the years. I wasn't angry at her anymore, nor was I resentful. If anything, I felt a tinge of sadness, not for the end of our marriage, but for how long it had taken me to see things clearly. That night, she packed a bag and left without another word. There was no dramatic farewell, no lingering moment of regret, just the sound of the door closing behind her. And with that, it was done. The days that followed were quieter than I had anticipated. The house felt empty at first, almost eerily so. But as the silence stretched on, it stopped feeling oppressive. It started to feel like something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. I began to reclaim my routines, filling the space she left behind with things that mattered to me. I picked up hobbies I'd long abandoned, spent weekends with friends who reminded me of who I used to be, and made plans that didn't revolve around anyone else's schedule but mine. It wasn't an instant transformation. There were still moments when the old patterns tried to creep back in, but each time they did, I reminded myself why I'd made the choices I had. The house, once a battleground of tension and unmet expectations, became a sanctuary. I rearranged the furniture, painted the walls, and turned it into a space that reflected who I was now, not who I had been in the shadow of our marriage. It felt good to see my own identity in the things around me, to wake up every day in a place that finally felt like home. She reached out a few times in the weeks that followed, testing the waters with messages and calls. I responded politely but firmly, keeping the boundaries I'd worked so hard to build. I wasn't cruel, but I wasn't open to revisiting the past either. For her, this might have been a chapter she wanted to rewrite. For me, it was a book I'd closed for good. As time passed, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't miss her, not the way I thought I would. What I missed were the parts of myself I'd given up for her. And now that I had them back, I didn't feel the need to fill the void she left. I wasn't lonely. I was free. Life moved on, and so did I. The space she'd asked for had given me something far more valuable than time apart. It had given me a chance to rediscover myself. And as I stood in the quiet of my home, surrounded by the life I was rebuilding, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.